Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Gui, and I'm the Industry and Education Programmer here at the Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. I'm a Southeast Asian woman with short strawberry pink hair, wearing a white furry sweater and sitting against a digital backdrop of the studio set built in the Real Asians offices. Welcome to Telling Asian Stories, the third panel in our Real Ideas conference themed Here in the Future Past. Real Asians offices and main activities are located on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas, of the Credit First Nation, and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat nations. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty of collective responsibility for the protection and sharing of land and resources. For our conference this year, as we continue with a digitally hosted space that will screen Canada-wide, we encourage audiences everywhere to learn the specific histories and stories of the lands that they are settled on, the lands of Treaty 11, the many treaty agreements, traditional unceded territories that continue to demand justice and to support the ongoing work of Indigenous leaders and communities. While acknowledging the festival's 25-year history of growth and challenge, we also want to renew and refresh our commitments to more abundance and complexity in Asian and Asian diasporic film and media arts. Regardless of our pathways of arrival, we all currently benefit from the Canadian government's broken treaties and imposed violence, and we reckon openly with our responsibility to this land, to its caretakers. We name the ways that we are complicit in structures of white supremacy, and also recognize that we're still in time of great upheaval and need. We honor the long-standing work of organizers, creatives, and communities that continue to give us hope, language, and possibility, and work together towards critical and reflexive allyship with Indigenous peoples exercising their sovereignty and working towards justice and freedom. For today's panel, we would also like to thank the Ontario Cultural Attractions Fund, Ontario Creates, and the Province of Ontario for their support. Hello to our audience. If you're watching from our watch portal, you want to ask us questions, we encourage you to send it through the chat or through the Ask a Question box at the top of the chat. If you are watching us from your cell phone, the chat should be at the bottom of the screen. And I want to give a shout out today to Jamie and Carmelle, our amazing ASL interpreters, and to our live captioner, Rhonda. Lastly, we would like to hear your feedback on our panels, so please visit us at realasian.com/RI survey to let us know what you liked, what you want to see from our industry panels next year. We'll have the QR code up at the end of the session, and each entry will, I think, enter you into a draw to win a survey prize. We will also be taking a 5-minute break in the middle of the session so that everyone can stretch their legs, grab some water. So thanks for your patience. I will now hand over our time to the amazing Karen B.K. Chan, who is a creative, award-winning sex and emotional literacy educator in Toronto, who will be introducing the rest of our panelists today.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to imagine seeing you. And it's great to see all the panelists that we have on hand today. I want to introduce you to each one of them. Let's start with Catherine Hernandez. Catherine Hernandez is the author of Scarborough and Crosshairs and the screenwriter of Scarborough, the film. We have with us Maya Bastian, is an award-winning filmmaker and writer. Her work, which includes the short drama Air Show and the film Tigress, often explores displacement and migration. She's currently directing a paranormal mystery series for Montreal's Reflector Entertainment and is in development on multiple features. Randall Okita is a Japanese-Canadian artist and filmmaker. His recent work includes the feature See From Me, the virtual reality experience, The Book of Distance, and the exhibition A Place Between. His work has been awarded internationally and screened around the world. Hi, Catherine, Maya, and Randall. Great to
Hey,
have
everybody.
you today.
Hi there.
So I want to start you all off, or start us all off, just to warm us up to a conversation. It's great that I get to ask the questions, because my first question has nothing to do with story or film. It's actually about food. I want to know, what is one of your favorite things to eat, a favorite meal that you cannot make, that you do not know how to make yourself? Who's ready?
I'll go. My favorite meal, and it's something I usually only get in Sri Lanka, is breakfast time. We have something called pol roti, which is these small little fluffy rotis that they put, pol means coconut, so like fresh grated coconut and chilies in. And you eat those with like egg and with something called pol sambal, which is like a coconut, fresh grated coconut and chilies little mixture. And that's one of my favorite things. I was eating it every day until my neighbor was like, if you keep eating those, you're going to gain a lot of weight, because I was eating like so much pol roti every day. And I'm not able to make it in any way the way that they make it there.
Thank you, Maya. Catherine, you look like you're ready to.
Oh, I was
share.
just thinking, it's not that I am incapable of making it. It's more like I just don't have a sausage machine yet. I my favorite thing to eat is longanisa with rice, which is Filipino sausage with rice. I love, when I was a kid, I loved eating that right before church and then stinking up church with Filipino food smells on my body. It's like, I just miss that. Miss it more than church. So yeah, there you go.
Thank you. And I like the long view on the sausage machine.
Yes, it's all planned. It's all planned.
Thank you. Randall?
I've been on a many month-long soup dumpling kick. And so we've been going all, like, just driving ridiculous hours to go and try the soup dumplings from everywhere. And but I haven't attempted to make them yet. And I suspect it's a little more difficult than I should take on.
Fantastic. Thank you, Randall. All right, let's get into it. I want to ask you about stories and storytelling. First question for all of you: what is the driving impulse to even tell the stories you tell and the stories you've yet to tell? What is the impulse? Where does it come from?
I mean, I would say that my driving impulse are definitely my ancestors. I know that my ancestors guide me every day in what stories I'm ready to tell. I just know that there'll be like this recurring image that comes to me either in dreams or just walking around, and I just know that it's time to put pen to paper. And even while I'm creating the work, I know that I'm on the right path. When it doesn't feel like me, it just feels like my fingers moving along the keyboard of my laptop. That's what drives me.
Thank you, Catherine. Maya?
Yeah, on point for sure. Like really taking inspiration from my ancestors and thinking about, I think, being Sri Lankan Tamil and having, just being the first generation out of the 30-year war that happened there. That has been a driving force for me to better understand not just what the Tamil people went through, but also what people all over the world go through when they are dealing with conflict and the trauma that results. So that's a driving force for me. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that, those answers so much. Yeah, I think for me, it's a sense of wanting to connect, wanting to translate something that's happening inside and try to, transmit that, and tell a story that might include some sort of sense of transformation. I find that process really magical. And to sort of and to use the voice that has come from, from where we've come from, and what my grandparents worked so hard to allow me to be able to share and to carry that forward.
Thank you. I'm curious, when storytelling might feel constricted and when it might feel free. I'm hearing one kind of freedom, like Catherine is saying, when you're in the zone or the flow and you're just the vessel for what comes out. I'm just curious, especially as Asian identified people, when it might feel particularly free and particularly constricted, if you can remember instances from your work.
I'll go when money comes into play. It feels restrictive.
Yes.
Because you're at, you sit at home and you write and you create, and it's this incredible freedom of expression. And then you're looking for money to make the things that you want to put out there. And that's, depending on how you get funded and where you get funded. But I found from the beginning of my career, grants, the granting system in Canada is incredible. And that was very freeing, because no one was trying to put me in a box. I was able to be an artist. But as I grow in my career and I start working with companies and developing projects with other entities, there is a restrictiveness that I have to fight, so that the vision that I'm holding and like the truth of my ancestors is coming free. It's definitely more of a challenge and more of a struggle as my career grows.
Thanks, Maya. Catherine, you're about to speak.
Oh yeah, I keep on waiting for other people. Yeah, if we were all in the same room, we have a little bit more social grace. I feel like on Zoom, we're always just anticipating the next person speaking. I'd say that definitely that resonates with me, the entire idea of how when money comes into play, I guess riding on that idea, it's also the people who have the money when they get in the way of ideas. That's really difficult, because I feel that the people who have the money in their pockets, when they have an opinion as to how things are supposed to be told, and there are certain guidelines about storytelling that supposedly we're supposed to adhere to, and yet the truth is that the most outstanding storytelling is usually the ones that just throw those rules away. So it gets on my nerves, like how, there's supposedly a way of doing things, but almost all the time that every time that I have wandered away and forged my own path, that's when I feel like I've won in life, right? But I certainly have paid the price for being seen as difficult, right? Sometimes in certain spaces. So yeah, it's I would say that it's the people who have the money. They're I feel that's what makes it challenging. Now, when I feel that there's the most freedom is when the people who do have money, I remember, it has nothing to do with filmmaking, but I remember working at Native Earth Performing Arts in administration there for that theater company. And I remember my artistic director at the time, Yvette Nolan, was just really clear. Just do your thing, come back, tell us what's going to happen. And I've never had that kind of freedom. And that's because it was an Indigenous-led organization, and they trusted me to make decisions. And it was great. I never had that before, because I had been mainly working for white institutions. And the freedom that it gave me to really dream big. And I'm really proud of the work that I did there in that company at that time. So yeah, I mean, when I have those fleeting moments in which folks trust me with a particular vision, it feels amazing. It feels like it feels like I'm on this like runaway train towards this place that I can't wait to see what I'm going to discover on the other side.
That's so great. I feel like, yeah, connected to that for me, what that brought up for me was that when conversations become imbalanced and more about product and less about process, because I think that people forget, if you want something, especially if you want something new and or you want something to represent something new that hasn't been represented before, you can't just talk about the product. You have to talk about the process and the, you know, inherent challenges and hard conversations and amount of time that needs to be dedicated to examining, you know, a process that leads to that thing that we're all trying to get to and share. And I feel like, yeah, when that's out of balance, sometimes it can feel constricted, because, you know, we're talking about something over here, but the problem that's going to lead to that, you know, is not kind of on the table for discussion. And that's often very much connected to the funding that's involved in these processes and the way that it's distributed or thought about. And, you know, sometimes it'll be like, well, we'll just change this thing, but there's not the larger conversation being had. So I think that comes to mind for me.
Could I also just like touch upon what Catherine said about how we getting labeled difficult? I feel like it's really important to talk about that and unpack that, because we quite often, if we're trying to solidify our voice or we're trying to fight for what's right, people of color get labeled difficult all the time. And it's such a denigrating term. It's such a term that's like colonialist in its perspective of, oh, they're just being difficult. And it's something that I think every single artist of color has had to deal with. And it's definitely something that I think about when I direct on set. Like, I don't want to be perceived as difficult, but then I have to overcome that to say, no, it's fine. I'm the director. I'm allowed to voice my opinion. So there's this interesting kind of push and pull I find in our communities around not wanting to be perceived as difficult, because that's what we're consistently told that we are when we're trying to fight for what is right. And I think it's just really important to kind of shine a light on when Catherine said that. I couldn't let it go. Like, we need to just unpack that. It's really important.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
thank you so much for even just like backing it up, because like even just saying it, I feel nervous even just mentioning that, because it's something where you don't want to burn bridges, but then why were those bridges there in the first place? Like, why do I have to make a bridge to you? You know, like what is this? So I'm excited, like you know, just in conversations like this, I very carefully I mention it until I sort of see that like-minded people are in that space. But definitely, I've paid the price a few times for being overly curious as to why, well, in their eyes, overly curious as to why something is done the way that it's done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you said also, Maya, like, put me in a box, right? So that's sometimes the pressure. And I'm curious actually what some of the boxes actually are. I don't want to re-traumatize everyone by getting specific, but I want to get specific, because sometimes we understand this as an abstract idea that, you know, artists of color, that filmmakers of color, that women of color often put in a box, but then we don't get to say the rest. I mean, what I'm hearing already is, don't ask too many questions and don't do things like in a strange way that I don't understand. Help me trust you. But what are the boxes that each of you actually encounter?
I mean, that element of trust, right? Like, help me trust you. Why do I need to get you to help me? Like, if perhaps if it was like you know, a white person and a white person, they'd be like, there's trust. But for some reason, I do find, like, as a person of color, as a woman of color walking into environments, sometimes there's like, oh, you have to earn my trust. which I don't understand. Like it's like off the bat, not trusted. And then I have to earn that. And so I tell my daughter's 11, I tell her this all the time. Sometimes we have to work harder than anyone else to earn trust and to gain, what we feel is success, because we are put in those boxes. So there's definitely that. I think again, just being labeled difficult is something that I feel like I've been labeled since high school, and someone said to me recently, that I was angry, because I was angry in a certain situation. And I said, well, I think people of color are allowed to be a little angry. I think we're allowed to voice our frustration at what's happened with, how we've been treated in the world. Now we're allowed to say it. We're allowed to talk about it, and it's open, and we can say things like that in this panel discussion. I can talk about it in certain rooms that I couldn't talk about it before. So I think it's okay for me to be frustrated and upset at times. And I don't want to be labeled angry for that, so, and I think even just being a powerful person or wanting to own my power becomes a threat sometimes when you're in a position of power to people. And it's really interesting, that sort of delicate balance. Like I'm just coming off of set, like 3 weeks of shooting with a big crew. So it's like learning how to own that and understand that delicate balance of being in a position of power and on the set, and what that entails as being a woman of color. So there's a lot of boxes that we have to break out of. There's a lot.
Thanks, Maya. Anyone else ready to describe any boxes?
I mean, I have to say that, like, thankfully with the making of Scarborough, I felt that the freedom to be myself was palpable. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I wrote the damn thing. Like I wrote it. It was my idea to get this started. Like I get it. And when you're talking about, like, how money, when there's money involved, all of a sudden there's a lot of different voices, like a lot of different opinions at the table, right? A lot of those opinions are not yours, right? Or there are a lot of opinions from people that do not look like you, right? I did not know how unusual that experience was going to be. Again, because this was my first film, it was my first screenplay, my first adaptation of my own novel. So I was just thrilled. I was thrilled to know that most of the crew was racialized. A lot of the crew was women identified, and I was just extremely thankful. And at the same time feeling, why am I so amazed by this? Could it not be like this all the time? But really every day on set, I felt like moved to tears by how relaxed I was around everyone. And I know that if the book had been put into the hands, if we had it optioned by someone else who didn't have the same vision as us, it would not have been that easy. It would not have been. And I'm glad. I just want to just share that, when you don't have the box, like you can feel it. You feel it just as much as you feel when you are in it. And I'm happy right now, to be involved with some projects that really prize the voice that I'm bringing into television, and I feel so thankful about that. My goal right now and my intention is just to make sure that I learn enough so that more people like me are going to be seen by more people like me. Like, it's just so that it's not just going to be my voice, but then guided by a bunch of people who don't look like me. So that's my intention at this moment.
Thank you, Catherine. Randall, any thoughts on boxes you're put in, and or the products that you're supposed to make?
I mean, I echo these thoughts so much. Yeah, there's a lot of boxes, and I feel like sometimes the work ends up being sort of identifying the boxes and stepping in and out. And I'm having these images of stepping outside, or, when the box goes away and you like, wait, did you guys not see this? Do you not understand how this is happening? And then the feeling that sometimes you don't want the work to be about the box. You just want the work to be about the life that you're living and the other things that are happening. But I think that the expanding of those conversations is what gets me excited, and especially when you see people having similar experiences, and or when you talk to other makers, it just makes it's like fresh water when you're thirsty to understand that other people are having similar experiences, and people are wanting to see these conversations, continue to be expanded. And when you see a story that reflects, your experience, it changes things, it lights things up, and it's so powerful. So, unfortunately, the box has to be part of the conversation sometimes, and it still has to be. But I think we have to have and talk about all of these feelings about what it's like to wrestle with that, and to want it to change.
I'm wanting to remind the audience that are joining us live that your questions, your thoughts are so welcome. So please go ahead and share them with us. We'll have them directly bounce off of the panelists too. So please do that. I'm curious about, sorry, did someone? Yeah, Randall.
I was also gonna say, because you said about products, and I was just gonna maybe carry that forward to the idea of the things that we, working sometimes in virtual reality or film or sculpture. And like, I feel like over time people have said to me many times, you should do this. Like, you have to choose, and this will make it easier for people to hire you, and this will make it easier for people to recognize what it is that you do, and you'll be able to carry forward in this way. And I think that there's echoes there in a lot of different directions. But I just wanted to say that you have to sort of resist that and do the thing that you want to do. And the more that you do that, the more people will be able to see that, and then eventually come to you for the thing that is you. And whether that means the way that you write, the way that you express yourself, it could be the medium. But that's been a really powerful lesson that has come over time, in terms of sticking to that and just following my gut and the things that I wanted to make.
Mm-hmm. This you've answered actually the first question we have from the audience, which is, what are actual practical tips, suggestions? And what I'm hearing is a lesson that you've learned through doing and through trials, that you could give to emerging creators, and how to negotiate and navigate labels and boxes, especially those boxes are gateways to funding.
Oh.
What do you do, and what would you say to either earlier version of yourself and folks who are swimming up at this moment?
I'd say create your own work. That's what has been, for me, the secret to my success for my career, has just been you. If you're the one who's creating the project, then the better chances that your story is going to be told the way that you want it to be told. And you can sense it. That entire thing that I can't believe that I'm like quoting Oprah here. I've become that middle-aged woman who quotes Oprah. When someone tells you who they is in the first 5 minutes, just believe them, that sort of thing. You can smell it when they are trying to use you as the diversity bait. You can smell it and trust it. So when it happens, you can say, thank you very much. I'm gonna go do my thing. And I know that seems like really painful, but I want you to understand is that it never pays off. I have been that diversity checkbox before, and it doesn't feel good. It never feels good. The and it has nothing to do with ego and just dignity. It becomes like a logistic thing. Like, you know, you're going to start to see a disrespect for your time, a disrespect for your money, your ideas, like all these things. It never feels good. So I understand that these entire gateways to funding situation, but I feel the best thing to do is to, money aside, volunteer for the organizations that you feel are really great, that are going to give you the experience that you need, and start to figure out how to make the project yourself. It's just that's what I did. I know that that's a really difficult terrain to navigate, but just think about like how much harder it is in your career to then deal with the trauma of being put into those boxes over and over again. You can make a decision. You can make a decision about that, like what works better for you. And that's what, for a loudmouth Asian woman who's queer, who has tattoos all over her body, that's what works for me.
What works for you, Maya?
Integrity. Just staying true to who I am, what I believe to be true, what my vision is, and what are the stories I want to tell. I don't waver from my personal sense of integrity. It's always growing and expanding. It's always becoming, but I don't waver from that for anybody. And that's definitely, again, like middle-aged, you know, like when I was in my 20s, I was like, sure, I'll be your diversity checkbox. Sure, I'll do this, I'll do that. And as I got older, and this goes back to something that Catherine was saying earlier about like being on a set full of people of color and women, it's like you realize and recognize how much safer you feel, and the difference in your, like, even my heart rate, you know, is like more consistent when I'm like on in places where I feel respected and where I feel I can uphold my own sense of integrity. And so now I gravitate towards that. And the more that I do, the more I manifest the things and they come to me. So it's like I'm really putting out with intention and integrity what I want. And then a lot of times these people don't come to me for those diversity checkboxes anymore, because I am not going to, they know that I'm not, like, it's just falls away, you know. I'm too much of a loudmouth to, like, you know, to be anybody's diversity checkbox. But you know, on the other hand, I really resonate with, like, you know, the boxes of and this is something that I feel like has been talked about a lot, is this term called like trauma porn, where you're like asked to just consistently relive your trauma so that you can check a box. And as someone who writes and creates often within the context of trauma, I'm always trying to shift away from that perspective of like, how can I sell my trauma to you? And really talk more deeply. Okay, if I have to be in this box, if the way I'm going to get funding is to say that, then how can I shift the perspective on what you're trying to get me to say? How can I change that through my storytelling? And that's something that I do a lot more now. And I feel with the film that's at Real Asian, it's like I never, when you work with people, especially when I'm telling stories about conflict and war, the de facto kind of thing is to make it like guns, 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 bombs, bombs, bombs. And I've had that so much, you know, and I've had to seek out and consciously find collaborators who don't want to do that. Because sometimes someone will introduce them to, oh, they should edit this, or, oh, you should do sound design with this person. And then that's all they want to do is like hammer in people's faces what war and conflict is. And for me, it's all about the nuances of that. And that's what I'm exploring. So I definitely, like, you know, in order to uphold the integrity of that, I shift towards allies, people who I know can understand these things. And for me, finding allies has been a big part of shifting out of the boxes that people want me to be in, and being able to like find my voice on a larger scale, is finding the right allies, people who understand and get what I'm trying to do, and who support it, and who are just understand what allyship takes, and what is necessary in order to make the best stories that we can make.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Catherine. It's 5:05 right now, so I think we're going to take our 5-minute break. When we come back, I want to talk more about allies. I want to talk more about this idea of what war is, what an Asian story is, more boxes essentially. And I also want to, and I'm just going to throw this out there so that maybe you have even more time to think about it. The stories that excite you right now, other people's stories, and their storytelling. It could be books, films, other ways of telling story that that are exciting you, and maybe also how do people, who are the people talking about identity in a way that you can really relate to, that you really want to take inspiration from, that you feel is authentic and beautiful. So let's take a break right now. We're going to do 5 minutes and we'll be back at 5:10. Welcome back. Welcome back to our panel, Telling Asian Stories. We're here with Catherine Hernandez, Randall Okita, and Maya Bastian. Before the break, we were talking about allies and finding allies, recognizing them. I'm so curious who allies are, and do they often look like you? Because that is another concept that has come up, looking around often, either seeing or not seeing folks who reflect yourself back to you. I'm curious about your allies. Who are the collaborators and allies? Do they often look like you?
I think that I've had a few allies just recently where I'm that they are not from my community, and it's been refreshing. It's been lovely. I think it's just I don't know if it is. I'm hoping that I'm not going to be so surprised all the time, but it is. It is always really surprising. I will say though, what still surprises me is when people who look like you, or who might be from your community, who are not allies. Because let's just be honest, is that as Asians, Asian presenting people, is that we do hold a lot of privilege compared to Black Indigenous people. And in those spaces, when you have to admit your proximity to whiteness and to call that out in the room, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And again, that entire thing about being difficult, it has happened in a few rooms where having to call out anti-Black racism, for example, it seems to be too difficult for people to wrap their heads around. And I should check myself on that, because it's actually not too difficult. It's actually they just don't want to. It's not something that they want to do. It's too uncomfortable, and I'm saddened by it. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. Who are your allies and how do you recognize them? Do they look like you? Maya, go ahead.
How do you recognize allies? That's a big question. I definitely, I think I mentioned, like, I spend a lot of time within my working environment with people of color, particularly women of color, because I feel safe and I feel free. But interestingly, a lot of my producers have been white in the last number of years, and I've found great allies with them. But there's always lessons to be learned as well. I mean, and I think it's, for me, allyship is if someone wants to be an ally, I think they have to be open to learning. They have to be open to evolving. They have to be open to knowing that they're not, as I do as well, right? Like that they're not perfect and that they're not always going to get it right. And I feel like we as a culture are constantly evolving. Even our language is evolving, that, has changed with time. And so I never feel like I'm always getting it right, but I am always willing to be humble and apologize, and try better next time. And I think that that to me is like a real sign of allyship. It's not like I can be the best ally I can be at all times, but I could try. And so when I work with white producers, I think that's the expectation that I have. And most of the time, you know, they come through, and if it comes to a point in the past where that is not happening, or the sort of layers of privilege are rearing their ugly head, I walk away, because the stories that I'm telling to me are too important to entrust them to people who are blinded by their privilege. So, I mean, it's a tricky business. I mean, we're in a situation, especially in the film industry, where the gatekeepers are not of color for the most part. It's changing, which is amazing to watch and be a part of. But you know, you have to constantly, and I think Catherine mentioned it earlier, like knowing who's in the room and knowing, like, look for your people. You know, I think that's really something that I do often. And I also, a big part to me of allyship also is like not expecting me to do the emotional labor all the time because I'm the person of color in the room. And that's something that has happened so much. It's like, oh, there's this issue about representation. Do you want to handle that, Maya? You know, like, oh, you're the person of color, you should handle that, you know? And there's been lots of conversations where I say, you know what, I'm tired of having this conversation. Why don't you take it? You're prepped, you understand it, you take it. It doesn't have to be handled by a person of color. You know, and so I think that there's that, like the emotional kind of labor of it all, and partnering up with people who get that it's not on me. And I even have, like, within my friend circles, the same thing, you know, where people will say, no, I'm going to handle that. Like, you don't need to do that. Like, where I have white friends who will do that, which I really respect. That, and like, as Catherine said too, it's like, you know, there's this discomfort around when we talk about anti-Black racism, or when we talk about Indigenous issues in this country. There's a discomfort and general discomfort when we talk about any of these issues that we're talking about right now in many rooms. So I think it's really important for people, anyone who wants to be an ally, to address that openly and regularly. You know, not just once and then we don't talk about it for a year. It's like, let's continue to talk about it. And these are things that I've learned from being consistently putting myself in situations with people of color and women of color, working situations, so that I don't have to. There's this beautiful like space holding that happens when you're on a set full of you know, underrepresented people, which actually allows for the artistry to be better, because there's this vulnerability and there's this space holding and there's this respect. And then the artistry just flowers and blossoms because you have all of that around you. And I do find on conventional sets or on conventional workspaces where you don't have that amount of space holding, or that amount of, like, you know, for lack of a better term, like wokeness, it's like the oppression is so thick, you're like wading through it. And it's tiring, which is why I don't want to be in those anymore, in those situations. And which is why, if I have to be in them, I find allies.
Thank you, Maya. Randall, do you want to weigh in on this one?
I love that. And yeah, I would just echo, I mean, the sense of people talking about the sense of safety, you know, following your gut. I feel like, you know, you want your friends, you want your allies to make you feel good being who you are, but also to not be afraid to call you on your shit, and to not be afraid to go there openly and frequently, and to make things better, the product that you're working on, the situation in which you are working. You know, and you find places, you know, find places to gather, like Real Asian, find you know, artists that resonate with authenticity and courage, and find people who are also gravitating to those conversations, and see what they're up to, and also keep in mind that you know, it's not necessarily about the qualifications, or, you know, that sense of authenticity and courage and safety is as important as somebody's resume often. and we can give people, you know, the chance to step into roles that they might not have had the chance to yet in that partnership.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We got a juicy question that I can't wait to hear your answers on from the audience. It says we have more Asian representation in media now than ever before, especially with Netflix content. Does representation equate to telling an Asian story? So having Asian faces, Asian names, is that an Asian story? What's your feeling around that?
Any story is an Asian story. Why does it have to be uniquely Asian for it to be our stories? That's what I think. It's like we can tell romantic comedies, we can tell any simple story we want, and it can be Asian simply by whoever wants to tell it. Like, I don't know. It seems to me like we're pigeonholing ourselves into telling like Asian stories, when all stories are Asian stories, all stories are Black stories in that sense of like, you know, we don't have to pigeonhole ourselves into the trauma or the specificity of race in order to tell a story. And what's wonderful about filmmaking or storytelling is that it's universal. So if we're telling like a simple story, something like Minari, you know, where like it's a beautiful story that makes it even more beautiful when you're seeing Asian faces in it. But the story itself and the emotions are universal. And that's why it was so resonant, at least to me. I don't know, maybe that's a controversial opinion, but I do think I don't want to be pigeonholed into telling Asian stories.
Anyone else? Thank you, Maya.
Yeah, I'm with Maya here. It's like, if it comes from you and you're from the Asian community, then it's Asian. If you want to make a puppet show, if you want to, you know, flash your little flashlight around the room, like whatever you're doing is Asian. Your creation is Asian. It doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to sound a certain way. It's whatever is coming from you is uniquely you.
Thanks,
And
Catherine.
yeah, I just also just want to say that, like, you know, when it comes to representation, you could just see us on the screen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's necessarily an Asian project. Like what I feel like, if we were really trying to up the Asian content, it means that we should see Asian producers, you know, writers. It would be really great to see more, you know, Asian specific media or people who are in mainstream media covering it as well. Like that was a really interesting experience for Scarborough, right? Is that it is just like this, all of a sudden, this very white lens on this show that has a lot of QT BIPOC content, right? Is that it would be really lovely to go to to TIFF and see like just representation all through the board, but that's just not necessarily the case. So just having this little this you know, just again, it's that it's what allyship is not, is that it's not embodied. If it's just like this representation, it's so much more than that. It's also how do we tell the story is what I want to bring up too, is that you can, yeah, there could be all of these Asian people in like in front of the camera, but if we're telling stories that are ableist, racist, all this stuff, like we can do better. We can do better than that.
Mm-hmm. Randall.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Well, and it just, you know, you can, it's I'm going back to gut a little bit, but it's also there, we have to be aware, and this has been touched on a little bit, of you know, a performative version of allyship or representation, and we have to ask for more. It has to be built into the process. It has to be built in behind the scenes, and so one thing, one face, one shade does not represent everything, and we have to keep examining and asking, and do better. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm really learning that, the idea around diversity, right? What we can count in a room, who's on screen, who's in the credits, but it's about creation too. So often, especially just as a consumer, a non-filmmaker person, who's on camera becomes, who I think a film is made of, versus who's telling stories, who's making stories, who's doing the admin around stories. This is a interesting question from the audience. What advice do you have for Asian people who are trying to tell their stories, who may not be loud and outspoken? And connected to that, another story, another audience member feels for them that being a first-generation immigrant, for them it often meant negotiating with a culture that wants to play it safe. And so they're curious about how that aspect of the culture also influenced you, if it did influence you.
I've never been somebody to play it safe. It's been like a blessing and a curse my whole life. So I have no response to that. Like, I just grew up fighting my way out of the system. I think my mom said, like, I fought my way out of the womb, like it's like, so I'm going to pass it on to the others, because perhaps they have more insight than me on that.
I remember speaking to someone who was a frontline worker in Scarborough who was dealing with issues with their management, and the advice that I always said was, I need you to practice saying things loud enough that you yourself can hear it. You have to practice at that. I have to practice as well, because I grew up extremely, I'm actually an introvert. Like, I love being by myself. I love my solitude. I love creating in solitude. And to show up in a room and being creative with other people, and sometimes you're having to be creative with other people who do not necessarily see your presence as valuable, right? Is that you have to plant your feet, you have to practice how to be grounded and to share of yourself in that room with confidence. And it's just something you have to practice. It's a lot of practice. Like, I have to do that as well, because I do this weird thing. I mean, you have to be aware of your body. Like, like if you're asking for something, I start to, twiddle a skirt. Like, I start to twirl a skirt that is not there. There's no skirt there. Why are you asking for this thing in this very coy way? You can ask very clearly. Like, it actually, especially being from the Filipino community, where Filipino women are really encouraged to ask for something passive aggressively. Like, if you don't mind, could you please give me a drop? I don't know if it's too much trouble, but could you? And by the time I was in my 30s, I had to really, plant my feet and just say, may I have a drive to the train station? And that's you have to train yourself to do that. And that's all I can say, is that being meek in those rooms, it doesn't necessarily help you. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be argumentative. You can learn how to be firm and confident.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will say this though. I think realizing that you taking up space, allowing yourself to take up space. We had this Southeast Asian filmmaker mentorship program on set in the last few weeks, and we had a young Vietnamese filmmaker and a young Laotian filmmaker. And one of the things I noticed about them was that they didn't want to come. Like, I'd say, "Oh, come with me here, let's do this," and they didn't want to, because they felt like they were imposing. or they were afraid to be standing in the room when we were setting up the shots, and I consistently said, you have to feel that you're welcome and allowed to be anywhere you are, and that you're allowed to take up space, and that you're allowed to, as Catherine said, ask for what you want. And I think that that's something that we're taught often, is like not to take up space. Like, you know, in my family, it was like children should be seen and not heard, right? Like I wasn't allowed to have an opinion if we were having family discussions with elders and things like that. And we're taught often to just go, you know, blend into the background. And it was something that I learned very early on. I think if I wish I had known it in my 20s in filmmaking. I kind of probably picked it up around my 30s, but I see a lot of young people who are just like, oh no, I shouldn't go in there, or oh no, I shouldn't do that. And it's like, well, why not? You know, can I stand in this room and watch you work? Can I be here and listen to this conversation? There's no harm in asking, and taking and learning how to take up space and feeling like you belong is something that I wish someone had kind of told me when I was young, because it took me a while to learn it. And it's something that is like defeating the South Asian narrative in my head that tells me that I should just sit down and be quiet, and look pretty, you know? So.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Catherine. Randall?
I was just gonna say, you know, there's a phrase that we try to repeat sometimes, and you know, it's that just remember that nobody's story is more valuable than yours. And remember that, repeat that, and if you have something that you want to share, find a way. And part of finding that way means, you know, listening to the sage advice of electric artists that we're hearing from, like Catherine and Maya, and observe what's happening and know where you're coming from. And that means a lot of things, but that includes knowing this sense of where you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to behave comes from. And it means sometimes feeling fear and doing it anyways. It feels like it means finding people who are going through that, and that you can see representations of courage, and find techniques like, you know, I'm writing this down, what Catherine said, just plant your feet, you know, and practice it, because you deserve to tell your story, and you need to find that way to do it, and the world wants to hear them. The world wants to hear your stories. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all. We have a question, and I think that I'll read you the question first, and then I'll ask you the question. At a certain point, it says, is writing for your own community just staying too safely inside a box? By catering towards our own communities instead of trying to appeal to a wider non-Asian audience, are we creating unnecessary divide between Asian and non-Asian communities? So to preface that question, I want to ask you, who do you imagine your audience to be? Do you imagine at all? And if you do, who is that audience?
I don't think about an audience when I'm writing or creating. I tend to just let it come, let it flow. But I certainly, like, you know, once I'm putting it out into the world, I do, mostly because my films address sort of the Tamil community, and the Tamil community has a lot of trauma and a lot of differing opinions. I do think about it more now than I ever did before, and I try to have community consultations and community screenings and talk about the film before the film comes out publicly. I ask a lot of different trusted advisors, and I just want to make sure that through telling my own stories that I'm not going to massively upset people. I think that's important to me now. It wasn't before, but when I've seen the community response, and I see how people are invested in the stories that I'm telling and excited about the stories within the Tamil community, It has become more important to me now to make sure that I don't know that there's any such thing as like accurate representation of one community, because there's just so many stories within like individualistic stories. But I do know that it's important to me that I'm at least listening and learning at all times, and with what the community is resonating with and what they're upset about. And I know I'm never going to please everybody. That's just impossible. But at least I can try to, I think about that audience. I don't really think about larger audiences, mass market audiences, but I think about the Tamil audience a lot when I tell my stories.
I just I love what you said about that, like that you don't, when you're creating, you can't have like this constant like third eye of like, oh, what are people gonna think, what are people gonna think, like who's my audience, because again, like I said at the very beginning of the event, is that I write what my ancestors told me to write. I stand by it. Sometimes what I write is difficult for people to take in. Sometimes it comforts people, sometimes it makes people feel uncomfortable, and that is okay. You have to allow the audience to feel what they're going to feel, and you're going to allow your audience to take shape the way that they want to take shape. And you can ask yourself, why is it important that a non-Asian audience takes in my material? Because to me it saves a lot of calories in my body that I can spend on eating chocolate, going out with friends, to not think about that audience. I have a lot of fun in my life not thinking about that audience. And I've created good things in my career because I didn't think about that audience. So ask yourself why. Why is that important? Because that's a big question that should be dealt with. Yeah, because it's I think that our need to please non-Asians and sort of have them look at our material is, I think, is a more important thing to look at.
Thanks, Catherine. Randall's nodding.
There's a lot in that question. I think I mean, I don't know, I'm sort of joking to the question, but I don't know what safety in what box, if we're talking about the artists, or the artists that I'm thinking about, the artists represented in the festival. I don't know that there's a lot of safety in those boxes. People are taking risks and being courageous and being honest, and we're talking about the universal through the specific. We have our stories, and good stories resonate for a reason. And you should talk about what you know. You should you should share what you are passionate about sharing, and the audience will find it. I don't think that there's a way to cater specifically to a non-Asian audience, or I think we have to think about that question and where it's coming from, and not, and as Catherine said, don't waste your time. Tell the truth, and the audience will find it.
Yeah, there's something like certainly something to be said about the universality of emotion, right? Like again, it goes back to that, like, are there Asian stories or are there just stories?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're telling the most truthful and honest story you can tell, it's going to resonate, even if it's so specifically about an issue that's, like, for example, with my country. I feel sometimes it resonates with people outside of the country. And the country I'm from is this tiny, teeny, tiny little island, but I always say that the issues there are issues that are worldwide. And I think the universality of emotion, if you place emotion, in truthful emotion, in your piece, it will just resonate outwards and people will find it. And that's the only way that in my mind I would think about mass market, is like, I just think about how truthful is this emotion, from the writing of it to the acting, to even the camera work, like how truthful is the emotion. And then it resonates. and the work is done for you after that.
Mhm. Thank you for those insightful answers. What I'm hearing is also like where we locate the problem, right? Let's say it is a divisive market, or the audiences are divided, and some choose to see your work and others say that's not for me. But it sounds like the problem is located there. It's not located in the making of it, that it doesn't appeal to every single person, but that, pervasive and chronic and historical legacies of racism, colonialism, all those things actually created those divisive audiences. So as long as you continue to create work, the rest may follow. I'm curious about this, whether you have any thoughts on these. They're very philosophical kinds of questions from the audience. Do the faces that are telling your story change if it qualifies as change, whether it qualifies as Asian? Meaning, if you're an Asian writer and your main character isn't Asian, does that change anything? Or vice versa, a story about non-Asian, a story written by a non-Asian person about an Asian person. Where are you feeling around that, if anything? Connected to that, another question about the philosophy of authenticity, right? Is what do you think? Can a non-Japanese person cook authentic ramen? By extension, what kinds of people can produce Asian content? Something to chew on.
Mhm.
That's a tough one to tackle.
Yeah. Good to take a stab. Okay, so, and it's good that we're struggling with this, because I think it's good for us to have difficult conversations around this. I love that these questions are being posed. So let's talk about, like, I guess, because we need to talk about privilege, right? Like, about the amount of privilege that we have as Asian folks, right? Is that if I guess it would depend on people who are writing, like the person who's creating, how much privilege do they have compared to the people that they're depicting, is really important for you to ask yourself. So, because it's not equal. It's not equal to have, for example, someone who has more privilege than me, for example. So I'm a brown, cisgender, queer woman, right? So if I had like a white, able-bodied, heterosexual man, right, writing about a Filipina, right, there's obviously a power difference there. And so because of that power difference, it means that this person has to ask himself, well, why am I telling this story? Why am I telling the story? And why do I have the privilege to be able to tell the story? Should I step aside and allow someone else to tell the story, right? Just recently, I was asked to, if I would adapt something that I really felt like immediately, first off, it was an amazing opportunity, but at the same time, I was like, thank you very much for this opportunity. This is actually not for me. I believe that the writer should be Black. It's not for me. And it takes, having grown up in a very anti-Black community, it was actually, I noticed in my body was like, maybe you can do it. Maybe you have it in you. Just take the money, like, absolutely, that was going in my mind. But then, to train myself regularly to be like, no, that's not for me. Thank you so much. But this is for someone else. And I could see sort of like this initial shock in the producer's eyes, like, you don't want to do it. I'm like, no, I just don't. I think I would love to be in that writing room. However, I think that it should be someone else who is helming this project. So you can see there, right, that there's a difference in privilege, that I can't take that on because I don't have the cultural knowledge to be able to take that on. Now, let's say that it's the other way around. We racialized people, we see white people all over the place. I think we know, unless like there's like this very specific cultural marker that, like, for example, if it's like from a very specific country where they're speaking a different language, they have a very different like religious background, that then absolutely you have to really research that like understand like, well, how do I do this, make sure that someone has like a set of eyes. If you feel that you have the ability to tell a story from another culture, I always ask someone from that culture. I pay them for their time. I ask them to look it over. I'm open to them telling them that I'm doing a really bad job. Or they can tell me I'm doing an awesome job, whatever they want to say. We make shifts based on their advice, and I'm also open to them saying, this isn't your story. Move on. So I hope that like sheds light, because I know that this is like I love that this is a conversation around ownership and all this. I think that it's so important to talk about that, especially with emerging creators.
Thanks, Catherine, for getting us started.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would just add and echo that it's a complicated conversation, and that it needs to take place, and we need to keep calling each other on what has been happening, and understanding that there's a lot of opportunities that people want to take advantage of, and there's a lot of seductive situations that we need to wrestle with. And I think Catherine put it so well in that we have to take into consideration that privilege and power have the ability to warp authenticity, and we have to be aware of roles and images that have been historically misrepresented. And this is what we're trying to address, right? It's not about making everything a documentary in real time. It's about addressing those power imbalances in the processes of making things, and talking to people that are going through it, talking to people from different communities, and reckoning with the idea that if we're going to be telling stories about communities, we can't tell them without those communities, and it has to be an engagement that is not laden with all of these power dynamics that render it that render it powerless in the process.
Mm-hmm.
This is a topic that comes up for me frequently, because I've specialized in conflict and post-conflict around the world, and I've worked within the context of trauma around the world. And so I'm frequently asked to collaborate on stories that are not of my culture. And I think both Randall and Catherine touched upon it, is that I do not do it without deep research and deep community consultation. I will not do it. I will walk away from a project if I'm seeing that like we're not doing heavy community consultation and deep research, and if I myself am not invested in that, and I'm speaking for me, it's all about first person narratives. I don't want to read research papers by white academics. I want to talk to people who've experienced it or whose family have experienced it, and so that's where I always go. And as a result, I think I'm able to somewhat competently, represent these communities because I do all that research. I mean, I'm working on a project that is about Southeast Asian, a very small Southeast Asian community right now. And, I worked on, there's a Canadian Black History show coming out on the History Channel. And they asked me last year it was a Black owned company that's doing it. And they asked me to be one of the researchers and a writer of the episode. And a lot of people questioned, why wouldn't they find a Black writer? And they do. They have Black writers for all the other episodes. I'm the only non-Black writer. And I think they wanted me on because of my experience within trauma context. and how I could shed light on that. And the only way I would do it is if I became a researcher as well, so that I could spend time within the communities and reading first person narratives and understanding and talking to people. I do feel like, it's complex. And there's certainly issues with, like, within the Tamil community. When Funny Boy came out, which was a feature film by Deepa Mehta, who is not Tamil, when there was a huge uproar because she didn't cast any Tamil people in the Tamil roles. She cast the oppressors in the Tamil roles, in a role about Tamil pain. And so people were very upset by that. And it really brought the issue of representation to the forefront. Like, what is good enough? How deep do you need to go in order to tell these kinds of stories? And a big part of me thinks that we are past the time where people should be telling stories about other people. There's more than enough filmmakers, there's more than enough storytellers from each culture to tell these stories, and they should be given more opportunities. But then the other side is like, I brought these opportunities, and what do I do with them, as Catherine said, right? Sometimes it's like there's red flags and I'm not going to go for it. Other times, like in the case of this recent Southeast Asian project, we got the studio to pay for a mentorship program for Southeast Asian filmmakers, and we brought on multiple consultants, and we deeply embedded ourselves within this small community, so that every single step of the way we were advised. And we were speaking, even as, right on set when things are happening. If someone's saying this isn't correct, or this is making me uncomfortable, then we stop and we talk about it and we find a better way. So it's always about being malleable and understanding people's comfort levels, and recognizing that, there's no one truth to any community. There's multiple truths, and you have to hear all of them, I think, to accurately tell or represent a community that's not your own, even to accurately represent community that is your own. You have to be aware that there's multiple realities going on, and just hear them all.
Thank you for really highlighting the interplay of history and power, and talking about, being really aware of that difference. Because what is really hitting me too is when we get a story wrong or do harm through a storytelling activity, that the different communities suffer differently. That, some of us can afford to be told, off color stories about us, because they're not told all the time, and then there's lots of room to tell our own stories. I want to use the last few minutes to make sure I ask you, and this is actually a question from Randall that I'm borrowing, which is the shows and the books and the art that's really exciting you, that inspires you, that you love these days, that maybe for identity reasons or not. What do you love?
I just watched Sort of, which is Bilal Baig's amazing CBC show that's now on HBO Max, and it's next level amazing, because of the fact that it's like subtle about the identity issues. Like, it's not like, blasting out who this person is and what their issues are. It's more just about an everyday reality and an everyday life, and it's funny and it's brilliantly written, and Bilal is just like the kindest, most compassionate human being. I think to me it's like one of my most favorite Canadian shows I've ever seen.
You took why too. I was inspired by that. Yeah, no, and I got to chat with them at the Giller Awards. Oh my God, how long ago was that? It was a Tuesday some time ago. I feel like, what is time? When was I at the Gillers? Because we know each other from theater, but the first thing I had to say was thank you. Thank you so much for creating Sort of, because I've got to say that in almost every producer meeting that I've had since it has launched, almost every time someone says, well, now that Sort of has been made, it means that we can push a bit harder. which both delighted me and also enraged me, was that all that it took one set of people to say yes to that kind of content, where you see this amazing non-binary femme just trying to figure out life, like just trying to figure out, like, what do I want to do in life? Who do I want to love? How am I going to be part of my family? Like, how do I do all these things? How do I juggle all these things in my life, right? That all it took was just one set of people saying yes, that now that so many of us will be getting a yes for our daring content. And I really hope that more producers say yes like that, because I feel that there should be more sort ofs out there. So yeah, absolutely, it's totally inspiring. And also this book is inspiring me. The Poet X is really inspiring me. I think it's like something that I'm sure that it's already been optioned, but yeah, it's like, geez Louise, it's such a good book. So there you go.
Thank you. Randall?
I love that. I echo that and celebrate this project. And also, I'm not going to tell you about a meeting that we had where the response was, we have something in development that's too similar to this. But I do want to say I want to echo what Catherine said and say more yeses. And if there can be multiple shows on the air that look one way, there can also be multiple shows on the air that look that way and that look a lot of different ways. And we have to keep asking for that and celebrating these successes and keep asking for more, because they don't have to be as few and far between. But I'll also say, no bullshit, but all of this stuff at Real Asian this year is amazing. The work of these two artists that we're speaking to tonight is amazing and inspiring, and every year I find the festival such a great place to discover new wonderful beacons of storytelling, and I'm glad to talk to you guys today too.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Randall. This has been delicious, and I thank you so much for the work you do, sincerely, and thanks for talking a bit about it today. I'm going to pass the floor back to Jasmine.
Thank you so much. I think just on behalf of the festival audience and staff, I know I've heard that the comment section is popping today, and I think you can see from the questions just how crucial and necessary some of these conversations still are for filmmakers and creators, just grappling with always these questions at both the really high level and also just the practical level. So thank you so much for your insight, for your generosity in sharing your experiences, and your willingness to address the really difficult questions, because they were definitely not easy. We also really hope to continue this conversation on the Film Forum on Discord for our audience as well. So there is a Real Ideas channel there. If you have insight and other thoughts, you want to share it with us, like, let us know. We will be there and available to talk about it. The QR code will go up at the end of this panel. And there will also be a QR code, again, reminder for the survey, so you can let us know your thoughts. Other folks I want to thank Jamie and Carmelle for your ASL interpretation. Thank you, Rhonda, for captioning services. For our backend support, Mimi and Joe, for Samir, who's been moderating the audience chat. Just a reminder that Real Asian is going on till November 19th. You can learn more about our programming and how to get a ticket at realasian.com/festival. And tomorrow's panel will be equally exciting on the function of festival in crisis, same time, same place. So hopefully we'll be able to see all of you there. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.
Bye.